Welcome back to the Beer Junkies. Today we are brewing a Doppelbock. The Doppelbock is a strong, rich, very malty German lager. You can have either a lighter Doppelbock going with 100% Munich as your malt, or you can go with a darker Doppelbock, which I prefer, as a much deeper, richer malt flavor. We're going to walk you through all the ingredients we use, the hops, the malts, the water profile, and the yeast. Also going to walk you through our process, the mashing, mash out, sparge, the boil, the whirlpool, knockout, fermentation, and at the very end, we're going to walk you through a taste testing of this beer. So let's get started. Before jumping into the water section and getting started with the rest of this video, I wanted to ask you guys a quick question. I'm considering getting an all-grain homebrew system at some point in 2024 so that I can brew some styles that I can't necessarily brew a full batch of on this commercial system. And I also want to get you guys some more content. So if you have any recommendations, I'd love to hear them. You can either leave a comment below or you can email me at brady@thebeerjunkies.com. And I'll look through all of them and hopefully get a homebrew system within the next couple of months and start pumping out some more videos for you guys. But without further ado, let's get back into this Doppelbock. The water profile for the Doppelbock is 50 parts per million of calcium, 15 parts per million of sodium, 55 parts per million of sulfate, and 65 parts per million of chloride. I want to try and accentuate that maltiness by boosting the chloride and by lowering the sulfate. So to do that, I'm adding calcium chloride, gypsum, and Epsom salt. Just like normal, I'll add it to both the mash tun and the sparge water to get that water profile where I want to. I won't have to add any acid. The roasted malts, that I'm going to show you in just a second, will drop that pH right to 5.4 where I want it to be. So right now I've got the hot liquor tank heating up with our brewing water. So while that's getting ready, let's go over the grains that we're going to be using. The grain bill for the Doppelbock isn't particularly complex. There's just a whole lot of the grains themselves. You can get an original gravity of upwards of 1112, but I prefer to keep mine between 1077 and 1090, just because even for the higher alcohol beers that I make, I prefer to keep them just a little bit more on the drinkable side. For grain selection themselves, you can make a 100% Munich Malt Doppelbock. That is totally fine. That will get you right in the style guidelines that you want. I prefer to add a little bit more depth and complexity, so I'll actually use around 70 to 75% Munich Malt, and I will cut that with about 20% Pilsner Malt, just to get some more fermentable sugars in there while keeping that rich, bready, malty base. To that, I add around 5 to 7% of a Carafa Munich Malt. I use Carafa Munich III. That will just add a little bit of color and a little bit more malt depth. And then I top it off with 0.5% to 1% of Carafa II dehusked malt from Wyeast. That is more of a color adjustment, but it will add a slight touch of complexity. I've got the mash tun ready to go, so let's mash in. This is our mashing setup. We are pulling wort from the bottom of the mash tun, pushing it through our mash pump, through our Herms coil to maintain temperature, and we are continuously recirculating to set up our grain bed filter. The Doppelbock is traditionally mashed via decoction style with rests at 120, 144, 156, and 168 degrees Fahrenheit. The malts today are so well modified that you don't really need to do the decoction mash, but if you have the time, the energy, the equipment, and capabilities, I would recommend trying it at least once. The Maillard reaction you get from boiling those thick portions of mash really does build up a nice, rich, complex flavor that you just won't get with single infusion mashing. But you can get by with single infusion mashing, which is what I'm doing today. If you're doing that, I would recommend mashing at 152 degrees Fahrenheit for about 60 minutes. I find that that gives you the right mix of alpha and beta amylase to get enough fermentable sugars while also producing enough dextrins to build up that body. I don't want the Doppelbock to finish too sweet, which is very easy with such a high gravity beer. So I prefer to mash on the lower side instead of going up to about 156 degrees, where alpha amylase is more dominant. Right now, I'm about 20 minutes into mashing, but I will be back when it's time to mash out. Our 60-minute timer is up, so now we are mashing out, pulling wort from the bottom of the mash tun, pushing it through our wort pump, through the Herms coil of the hot liquor tank that is now heating up to about 177 degrees, which will raise our mash temperature up slowly to 168 degrees over the course of about 15 minutes. Once mash out is complete, we will begin to sparge. We just finished mashing out, so now we are sparging, pulling wort from the bottom of the mash tun, pushing it through our wort pump. I changed the lever now to direct it towards the boil kettle, which is now filling up and heating up as we speak. Simultaneously, I am pulling our sparge water from the hot liquor tank, pushing it through our water pump, which is rinsing the residual sugars left in those grains. It is very easy to underhop these higher ABV beers. For example, 15 IBUs at a 4% beer is going to be perceived drastically different than 15 IBUs in an 8% beer. If you do not hop enough, then it can come off as sickly sweet and unpleasant. For this Doppelbock, I would recommend using an IBU to original gravity ratio between 0.3 and 0.4. For this recipe, that comes out to about 24 to 25 IBUs. I will add those all at the 60-minute mark with a clean, high alpha acid hop, such as Mount Hood or Magnum. You can use a German Noble hop, but they tend to have lower alpha acid, so you'll have to use more hot material. Right now, the boil kettle is heating up to a boil, but I'll be back when it's time to add these hops. We just got to a boil, so we will boil for 90 minutes. I will add the hops in at 60 minutes, and at 10 minutes, I will add a yeast nutrient. At 5 minutes, I will add a fining agent. Just finished the boil, so now we are whirlpooling, pulling wort from the bottom of the boil kettle, pushing it through our pump into the tangential input to create a vortex and pull all of the proteins and spent hops to the center so we don't push them over during knockout. We just finished the whirlpool, so now we are knocking out, pulling wort from the bottom of the boil kettle, pushing it through our wort pump. Through the heat exchanger, we are going through at just below 60 degrees, so we need to slow that down a little bit. We are oxygenating well. And then if we go all the way down here, we can see that we are filling up the fermenter and pushing all of the excess air out. We ferment our Doppelbock with Munich Lager strain 2308 from Wyeast. This will promote a smooth, well-rounded, and full-bodied beer, which fits perfectly with the Doppelbock flavor descriptors. We will pitch the yeast at 48 degrees Fahrenheit and let this free rise up to 52 degrees as fermentation begins. I will hold it at 52 degrees for about a week or until we're 4 to 6 specific gravity points away from terminal gravity, at which point I will let this free rise up to 68 degrees for that diacetyl rest, which is particularly important with these lager strains to make sure there is no diacetyl in that final beer. After about 3 to 5 days at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, I will begin to lower it by 4 degrees a day. This will prevent you from shocking the yeast because it does still have some work to do as it lagers. Once we get to 33 degrees Fahrenheit, I will hold it there for at least 24 hours for the cold crash, and then I will transfer it to our bright tank and begin to carbonate it to about 2.5, 2.6 volumes of CO2. After that, I will keg it and then let it lager for at least 12 weeks. These higher ABV beers do perform a little bit better with a longer lagering time, but 12 weeks is the minimum. After that 12 weeks is up, it is finally ready to be enjoyed. All right, this is what I've got. It is a deep ruby color with a nice white head for the smell. Oh, it's loaded with malt richness. There's no hop, but there's so many of those malt flavors. The caramel, the toastiness, that maltiness, it is all coming through. The taste is very similar to the nose, very, very malt dominant. There's a slight warming on the end, but it is not harsh at all. It's a very pleasant warming to let you know that there's some alcohol in there. I would say the bitterness is just enough to match it. You could probably go with a little bit more. It's definitely not what I would consider bitter, but it's also not sweet. We're over the age of 21. We do not condone underage drinking. Please drink responsibly. This is my biggest up to this point of a chug, so this could be fun. Whew. Delicious. Cheers. If you would like to see more brewing content like this, make sure you click that subscribe button right below, and please let me know what you'd like to see next in the comments. Cheers.